I'm Julissa Garza, and you're watching KHOU 11+. Election Day is tomorrow, and throughout this election cycle, we've heard from political experts who say young voters are critical and believe we could see a high turnout among that group of eligible voters. So we pulled together a group of young voters from the University of Houston and Rice University. Joining me now is Bryce Sheffield, Brawan Barazi, Alex Ellis, Deja Wilson, Milan Sam, and Justin Schnitzer. Now, first off, how many have already voted? And what was that first, what was the first week of early voting experience like? You want to take it away, Bryce?
Yeah, it was actually very easy for early voting, especially at the University of Houston. They just set it up in the student center, so it was just very easy. Go in there, give them your ID, and you just vote real quick. I did it right after class.
Were you eager to cast your vote?
Oh yeah, I did it right after a class where we were talking about the importance of this upcoming election in relation to ancient political thought, and he was just go serve your republic, and we went and voted right after that class.
Did everyone vote on campus?
No. Rice is a little different. They have an on-campus voting location only for election day, but for early voting they had a shuttle available that took us to the nearest center, and there's another center that was walkable.
So making access for everyone, making voting accessible for everyone. Deja, I know that's something that's very, very important to you. Talk to me about it. This was the first time you were actually a poll worker.
Yes, as a poll worker, and also as someone who spent the summer registering voters in the Philadelphia area. There's a lot of barriers to access, whether it be documentation or just access to a polling location in key areas of communities of color are issues that I feel go kind of under the rug. There's also a lot of, we see the sweeping of voter rolls and gerrymandering, especially in places like Texas. These are really big issues. So I think focusing on those for the future is also something that we should look at when we talk about political participation in certain groups, and especially among Gen Z.
Now, speaking of Gen Z, that's a large group of Gen Z voters eligible to vote. There's a lot of topics that are very important to you. Justin, tell me a little bit about one of them. I know we talked about them today.
Yeah, so one issue that's really important for me is the environment and climate change. I was saying earlier, I'm an Eagle Scout. I've done a lot of things helping out the environment, and seeing all the hurricanes, the high temperatures, and just the massive amount of species that are dying in the world. Once we reach a tipping point, we can't go back. And so for me, something that's really important, especially this election, is just focusing on getting people in office who represent that and who will help protect our environment.
Is there another big issue that you guys think top of mind that maybe you all agree on?
I think for most of us, we can agree that gun violence and reproductive rights is a big thing in the United States that we should be focusing on. It's ultimately putting a lot of people at risk if we don't elect someone who truly cares about the lives of individual Americans.
Alex, as a political science major, how vital do you think it is for Gen Z voters who are eligible and registered to get out there and vote?
I think it's absolutely imperative. For me, I do see it as my civic duty, but I think that for anyone, you should be able to look at this election and realize that, it's make or break. I know that every election cycle we say oh, this is the most important election of our lifetime, and I get that term gets thrown around a lot, but we have to recognize at a certain point that maybe we say it because it's true.
Yeah. Milan, what do you think?
I would also agree. I think it's really important to ensure that whenever we're talking about these rights, we have to ensure that voting rights, it applies to our generation. We have to make sure we use that right to its fullest and make sure we go out to the voting center and vote. I think just making sure where that voting center is really important, and having access to that location is really important.
What do y'all think are some misconceptions when it comes to Gen Z voters? I know we've talked a lot about this throughout the morning.
I think a big one is that Gen Z voters are uninformed / don't really care about the current election or the current political happenings. But I just think those misconceptions are just flatly untrue, and I think Gen Z is one of the most politically active generations that we've had in a while, especially with this upcoming election cycle and the amount of voter turnout we're already seeing from Gen Z.
No, go ahead.
I also think that of course, a lot of people think Gen Z is uninformed, but the people that are informed, a lot of people assume that it's just from social media, like very big TikTok like platforms, and that we don't really know what we're like learning about, which is just not true. I think a lot of Gen Zers, like Bryce said, are very informed and are very like looking forward to voting and informing others on this election.
Yeah.
Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, and I'll add, I think the misconception that Gen Z is misinformed is also a little bit laughable, just because I feel like we're also informed by our own experience. Like, as a black woman, when I see other black people being, you know, affected by police brutality, I don't necessarily need to go look up the statistics to see that it's a phenomena, or I don't need to, like, be a statistician to know that gun violence is primarily affecting our generation. Like, we're doing active shooter drills in schools, and it's becoming like, we're fearful of our lives when we go to school, and that's not okay. So I think we're informed by our own experiences and what we see our peers going through.
I'd also like to add that I think that it's very common for especially older people to assume that all young people think the same and we're all of a certain, you know, they're all very liberal, they're all very left-leaning. And while that is true for a lot of young people, I think that it's important to recognize that it's not just a single group that you can target with a single type of political ads. There's a lot of diversity. I mean, it's an entire age group, right? You wouldn't say that all Gen X or all boomers are the same, because they're not. And I think we've really been seeing this in this election specifically with, I mean, the Harris campaign did a fantastic job of reaching young voters, at least in my opinion. But if you want to see the flip side of that, I think that the Trump campaign has put a lot of effort into reaching young adult men, and they've been quite successful. So I think it's important to recognize that it's not just this group that's like a single blob, right?
That leads me to the next question. I mean, earlier throughout the morning, when we're sitting here during the newscast, we saw a few political campaign ads. Do you feel that Gen Z has been targeted well enough by every race?
I feel like Gen Z, the way that I've been, like the most TikTok or like campaign ads I've seen have come from like Harris's like TikTok page, which are like phenomenal and like definitely like hitting the marks of like campaign messaging, etc., while also being in like a format that easily reaches Gen Z, like Gen Z voters, because like a lot of Gen Z people aren't watching TV. Like, I cannot tell you the last time I've watched cable television. Most of the like news stuff that I get is off of news apps on my phone, stuff like that, things like Reuters News, etc. But so that means campaign ads have to be moved and targeted in different ways. So you've seen a lot of political campaigns move into places like Twitter, TikTok, etc., to reach these voters that aren't really like actively watching like campaign commercials.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more question. If you could use one word to describe how you've been feeling throughout this election cycle, what would it be? Go ahead, Justin.
Nervous. Very, very nervous.
Yeah, anxious. I think that's a good way to put it.
Anxious. Anyone else?
Another
Anxious.
synonym for that.
Essential, probably.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just,
it's
that's good.
What have y'all been? I thought we only had time for more questions. Turns out we have time for more, so that's a good thing. What do you feel would be your message to other young voters who haven't maybe voted early and are waiting for election day?
Probably to just get out and vote. Like, go and do it. There's like, if you're living in Harris County, Fort Bend County, Montgomery County, if you're not registered, you can still vote. There's so many there's county events that designations that's set up like for people who are not registered who can still vote. And go out to your local voting center, go out and try to vote. Listen, like, it's critical because like this election matters a lot, and make sure you focus on the local elections because they matter the most in terms of impacting you. But also make sure that like you're informed about what you're voting for in terms of the props, in terms of your overall ballot.
Yeah.
And also, what are you waiting for? Just go.
This
Can I add?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would add also, if you're in a community of color, especially if you're a black or brown person, our access to voting literally was fought for by our ancestors. So I think it would only be right to honor them by, exercising that right. And I think a lot of these issues systemically and, forgetting the word, but they impact us a lot more than other people. So I think it's really important to take that into consideration.
Now, something we see, no matter what generation, there's a handful of people that feel their vote doesn't matter. Their vote doesn't count. What do you say to that? Because clearly all of you believe your vote matters, right? If not, you wouldn't go out and vote.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is even if you live in like a deep red state or a deep red county, a lot of votes are still by like popular/plurality vote. So for example, the Senate race is by popular vote. So each vote literally matters. It doesn't matter if you live in a deep red county if you want to vote for Owl Red or not. It only matters that you get out there and vote and just get those numbers up. So literally every vote does count, and even if you are Republican or if you're a Democrat, your vote can easily allow the state to swing one way or another.
Juan, what do you think? I see you were looking a little eager to answer.
I also think that the belief that my personal vote doesn't matter does begin to add up over time. We've seen so many close elections in the past, and especially with the polling right now, we can see the election is pretty close. So if we continue to say my vote doesn't matter, these will eventually add up and can affect the election like in these coming days. So your vote does matter. They all come together. We are the United States, we're a community, and we're here to do our civic duty and vote.
Did y'all go vote alone, or did you go with family or friends?
I voted alone.
Alone.
I just voted alone, yeah.
Right before class, had to run.
I voted alone, but my family did go vote together.
Well, that kind of leads me to the next question. We've seen some polls suggest data that suggests young voters are more likely to go to the polls with a peer, or just more likely to do it if their peers do it. Do you feel like that's true, or do you feel like I'm going to vote regardless?
I guess it depends, because we're all political science, public policy majors, so we're already enthused to what's going on in the election. But it's also important to consider like the people who are not that interested. They'll probably feel more encouraged when their friends come along and are like, "Hey, I'm going to vote. You should come with me."
Yeah,
So
and I'll say, like, I've reached out to a lot of my friends, and I've made sure they're registered to vote. I share every time I go vote. I put my little sticker up. I put it on my Instagram story, and I reach out to my friends like, "Hey, go vote." Like I can like help you understand the candidates better if you need to, and just to make sure that I reach out to everyone I know, make sure all of our voices are being heard.
Now, we've talked about feeling like you have a responsibility, right, with your friends or family to make sure they're informed. Share with me a little bit more about that. I know we talked about it earlier this morning. Whoever wants to take it away.
I would say it's, as someone who spent time registering people to vote, it's the quickest way to shut out voters is to make it difficult for them to register. If you're not registered, you can't vote. And it becomes very difficult to try to cast a provisional ballot at times. So I think it's the getting out early. It's election season, so everyone's thinking about the campaign now. But in the summertime or in the early fall, right before that deadline approaches, I feel like those are the critical seasons where a lot of people were like, go register, just do it. It takes 5 minutes. You can do it online. You can do it in person. Like, get that done, get it out the way before it's too late, especially in states where the deadline is sooner than others.
For a lot of y'all, this is the first presidential race you're voting in, correct? Everyone or
for
not
everyone,
everyone?
Yeah.
How are you feeling with that being on the ballot? I mean, that is a big thing. I know y'all were talking to me earlier about watching previous, election cycles, not being able to vote. What does it mean now to you to be able to vote when it comes to presidential race?
I think there's a lot that I personally value in this election. So being able to go out and vote for what I believe in is super important to me, as well as probably everyone else here. So yeah, it's a big deal for me that I was able to see stuff that I personally value and being able to vote for what I believe in.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I will say it was a little scary because I've voted for some smaller elections in the past, but to vote for on a national scale the person that runs the country, like knowing that I have a say in that is a little much to take in. I'm staring at the ballot box, staring at like the candidates' names on the screen. That might be our president in tomorrow.
And with so much, right, that you guys all is pushing you to the ballots, do you feel that other people should do their research? I know you talked about if you get sent an AI image by a family member. Y'all talked about that. Do you feel it's your responsibility to try to help give that information during this election process?
Absolutely. I actually encouraged my roommates to sit down, look at your sample ballot, and look at every person there and don't look at the party, look at what the person is saying.
Yeah.
I think that's especially true for Texas, since we do vote in judges. And well, if you're in a blue county like Harris County, or if you're in a red county, it's pretty easy to get elected as a judge if you know which party to choose. And you want to make sure that the people who are judges, that's the closest encounter you might have with a politician if you're a regular person. You want to make sure that they're grounded people who believe in the same things you do, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely encourage my roommates to, sit down, make your little cheat sheet, take that into the booth since you're not allowed to be on your phone. And I think it's a great practice to just sit down, and I get it. It can be very overwhelming because there's so many races. But if you do it sometime in advance and you just take your time to see what you're voting for or what you want to vote for, it can be really enriching, especially if afterwards, if you're following, who's winning, who's losing, and who all these judges are, and that's the guy I didn't want to win, and he doesn't win, and you're like, yeah, I helped that happen. It's a really gratifying feeling.
Do y'all feel any pressure as young voters? Because we've seen a lot of campaigns targeting young voters, like y'all mentioned, on TikTok. And also, if you listen in to political experts, a lot of them say the young vote is crucial. Does anyone feel any pressure?
Yeah, I think it's like it's a pressure that should be there, just because if we need people to get out and vote in the polls, you need to know that this is like a very important election that's going to be coming up. And I feel like the social media campaign pages are out there, the voting organizations are out there trying to make sure that you get out and vote. I think that's all very important to make sure that our democracy continues to function, and it continues its stable path.
Yeah. It's a responsibility.
Yeah.
It is.
I think there's also definitely pressure again because these are issues that directly affect us. Like, we're the ones taking on a lot of college debt right now. We're the ones being impacted by gun violence. We're the ones who are likely at risk of having our reproductive rights stripped, and we're, of fertile age. Like, all of these things affect us super heavily. So I think there's a lot of pressure on us to be the ones to act.
How have y'all been handling the pressure and the anxiety that comes with the election?
Memes.
Well, that's what we said earlier, right? So unserious, but still serious at the same time. So humor has been a big thing for
You
y'all.
have to laugh from crying sometimes because some of the things that are going on are so unserious.
It can only make you laugh.
Yeah.
Well, what do y'all feel about people who think Gen Z is very unserious in this election period?
I think you put it really well earlier that we're so serious that it turns us unserious, right? We're so serious about what's happening in this country, but of course, Gen Z was raised on the social media platforms, right? So we're always joking around about things like that, but I think we can't, we should not mix up the seriousness and passion Gen Z has for this election with the humorous comments that we make from time to time.
You have to do it, right, to stay sane a little bit?
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk more about that voting experience. How did y'all feel when you got your I voted sticker, walked out, and know that you voted in races that are very important to y'all?
I feel like I completed my civic responsibility. The moment I was able to get that I voted sticker, it felt like I was truly fulfilling what my obligation was as a citizen of the United States of America. And I think making sure that more young people have that feeling is really important. And like I mentioned before, and I keep reiterating, please go out and vote. This is a really important election, so go out and vote.
How did y'all prepare for voting, and what research did you do? Alex, I know you said you sat down with your roommates, told them to look everything up. What did y'all all do to prepare to go to cast your vote?
Yeah, so on the Harris County website, I can just look up my address and it gives me a sample ballot. I can look at all the races and all the different propositions that I'm voting for, figure out who I want to vote for on each of them, write it down on a little list, go out and vote. Makes it really easy, and a lot of people just don't realize that these kind of things are available. They don't know what's on their ballot.
So it was a lot of prepping, looking ahead. Did everyone else kind of do the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like with most of us being on the UH debate team, this current debate topic has been very intertwined with the election itself. So just a matter of us going out and debating across the country has been constant research over the election and the election cycle.
Yeah.
What are big things y'all research? What would you say you research more, candidates or issues?
Within debate, yeah, I would say a bit of both, mainly the candidates and how they're going to impact the nation as a whole, but also the individual themselves, right? Like, you need to focus on how they're going to impact all of us, but also how are they going to impact you? And I think we've researched both of those things.
Did y'all make sure too, because we know, I mean, Harris County voters have pretty long ballots of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Did it feel overwhelming?
It did. I was researching. I was like, wait, why are there so many judges? And then I was like, oh, the props, you know, because you see it on like the campaign commercials and things like that. But then to like really sit down and like, what does Prop A mean? What is this like advocating for? I think it was definitely overwhelming, and that's also a privilege to be able to like have the time and resources to even be educated about these things. But I think if you have the privilege to educate yourself on that, then you should absolutely take advantage of it. So
I also think that something overwhelming. Personally, I voted in Fort Bend County. I did not vote on campus. So seeing all of the signs outside of the library and all the like political, I guess like volunteers walking around trying to influence you at that very last second is very overwhelming as a first-time voter. I did not expect to be approached by like 15 different people. So that was an interesting thing to see as well, an experience for the first time.
Do y'all feel for the next election cycle that you'll be involved even more? I know you were already a poll worker. Would you do it again?
It was a long training. It was a long training, but I think I would do it again. It feels like really empowering to be able to be a part of that, especially considering like just a couple decades ago I couldn't be involved in any of this. So I'm just, you know, glad to be able to participate.
I'm sure everyone just feels good being able to be involved and not sitting back and watching. You can now vote.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I thank y'all so much for talking to us. So we want to give a big thank you to our panelists. A round of applause for yourselves for joining us here on KHOU 11+. I'm Julissa Garza.